Every empire thinks its wealth is eternal, but history proves that mountains of gold can vanish almost overnight. In 1917, as the Russian Empire collapsed, one of the largest gold reserves in the world disappeared. Billions, by today's standards, simply evaporated into the chaos of history. Some say it funded the Bolsheviks, others that it was stolen by foreign powers. What we do know is this: when Russia's gold vanished, so did the financial backbone of an empire. At the start of the 20th century, Russia was sitting on one of the largest piles of gold on Earth. By 1914, on the eve of World War I, the Russian Empire held over 1,200 metric tons of gold. This was more than Germany, Britain, and the United States combined. Gold was the lifeblood of the financial system because currencies were anchored to it. Russia's ruble, backed by this immense stockpile, gave the empire credibility on global markets. For ordinary Russians, it meant stability. The government could fund armies and pay for imports because the world trusted that behind every note there was real metal in the vaults. But war changes everything. When World War I broke out, Russia poured its wealth into the battlefield. The cost was staggering. Gold reserves began to flow westward as Russia paid its allies. The government also started printing paper money far beyond what its reserves could support, hoping nobody would notice. Inflation soared. Prices for food doubled, then tripled. For the average person, life became unbearable. By 1917, the empire was cracking. Soldiers' mutinied strikes spread, and bread riots erupted. The February Revolution forced Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate. A provisional government stumbled into power, but it was weak and divided. And as it tried to hold the war effort together, one question became urgent: what to do with the gold? Some of it was moved eastward, away from the front lines. Trains loaded with bullion rumbled into Siberia, guarded by soldiers whose loyalties were increasingly uncertain. Some gold was sent abroad as collateral for loans, but much of it just disappeared into the fog of revolution. When the Bolsheviks seized power in October 1917, they inherited only part of what had once been the world's second largest reserve. And that is where the mystery deepens. The Bolsheviks immediately began using what gold remained to finance their survival. Lenin and Trotsky knew that ideology alone could not buy weapons or food. They sold gold abroad to fund the Red Army and traded it for supplies. But Western intelligence reports at the time suggested the Bolsheviks controlled far less than what had existed just a few years earlier. Somewhere, hundreds of tons had gone missing. Some of it likely fell into the hands of the so-called White Armies during the Russian Civil War. In Siberia, Admiral Kolchak, leader of the anti-Bolshevik forces, controlled a massive stockpile. At one point, he held more than 500 metric tons. But when the Bolsheviks eventually captured him, much of that gold was gone, stolen by corrupt officials, shipped abroad for weapons, or simply looted. To this day, stories persist of Kolchak's trains carrying crates of gold into the wilderness, never to be seen again. For ordinary Russians, the disappearance of the gold was catastrophic. Without reserves to back the currency, the ruble collapsed. By 1921, it took thousands of rubles to buy a loaf of bread. The once mighty empire had lost the very foundation of financial trust. And here is the unsettling part. This pattern isn't unique. We saw it in Rome, in Weimar Germany, and in every modern inflationary collapse. When governments debase money and reserves vanish, society itself unravels. By the mid-1920s, Soviet Russia had regained control of what little was left, out of over 1,200 metric tons before the war. Estimates suggest that fewer than 300 remained. The rest had been looted, traded, or simply vanished. The Russian people were left with a broken economy and decades of hardship under a new regime that learned the same lesson every government eventually discovers. Controlling money is the ultimate form of power. So why should this matter today? Because the same dynamics are still at work. Governments hoard reserves to project strength. Nations under pressure know that gold remains the one anchor of trust when fiat currencies falter. We also see echoes of 1917 in how reserves are weaponized. In the past decade, Western powers have frozen hundreds of billions in foreign reserves. Money is not just a tool of economics. It is a weapon of politics. And once again, ordinary people bear the cost. So what do we take away from the vanishing Russian gold of 1917? First, Never confuse paper promises with real wealth. When the vaults were emptied, the ruble became firewood. Second, crises are when wealth changes hands. The empire collapsed, but bankers, smugglers, and foreign powers made fortunes from the chaos. Third, remember that control of money is always about control of people. The disappearance of Russia's gold wasn't just a mystery. It was a turning point, showing how fragile wealth is and how quickly it can be stripped away in times of turmoil. It is a warning for us, because while the story is over a century old, the dynamics are timeless. Debt, inflation, currency, manipulation, and the silent transfer of wealth from the many to the few. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes with terrifying precision. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers, and I'll show you where to look.